On in there, everybody. Today, it was the turn of Reform UK to unveil their contract with the people. Let's have a look at it. Also, do you reckon the Labour Party are telling the truth when it comes to what taxes they are going to raise? And speaking of the Labour Party, this great British energy plan, is it actually going to make our bills cheaper or not? And last week was the turn of Dawn Butler. This week, Suella Braverman. What's going on with these TikTok dance rap videos? Is it a cringe fest or a special weapon to win votes? You tell me. Lots to get stuck into tonight, but before we start, let's crack over to Polly Middlehurst for tonight's 6 o'clock news.
Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight, Reform UK has launched its election contract in South Wales today, described as a serious plan to reshape the way Britain is run. The Reform leader, Nigel Farage, said he wouldn't call it a manifesto because too many voters have lost confidence in the term. Mr Farage outlined plans to freeze all non-essential immigration and take Britain out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Reform UK would also introduce a new tax for employers which choose to hire workers from overseas. And earnings under £20,000 a year, they say, would be tax-free, with extra funds made available by abolishing the government's net zero targets. Mr Farage says he wants to restore trust in British politics.
The great British public who want some hope, who want some aspiration, those at the lower end of the income scale who can't make ends meet, those who are trapped on benefits, and I mean trapped, they can't get off because you work for more than 16 hours a week, they take your benefits away, and we're aiming at those people, we're aiming at people who would like well-paid jobs in the manufacturing sector.
41% ahead of the Tories on 21, while Reform UK trails on 15%. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he'll fight on and he intends to win.
There's still 2.5 weeks to go in this election. I'm fighting hard for every vote because I believe we can win. And there's a very clear choice at this election. It's having your taxes cut by the Conservatives or facing significant tax rises with the Labour Party. Now, we know now the manifestos are all out. Everyone's cards are on the table. With the Conservatives, we will cut your taxes at every stage of your life. And in contrast with Labour, the tax burden is going up to the highest we've seen in our country's history.
Rishi Sunak. Now, the RAC has accused fuel retailers of exploiting the focus on the general election to keep their price margins persistently high. The motoring group says wholesale costs have fallen in recent months and there's no reason for retailers to maintain their current pricing. It comes as the Liberal Democrats call for a fuel duty relief scheme to be expanded to improve affordability in rural areas. Sir Keir Starmer is promising an end to what he's called chopping and changing in government, which he says discourages investment in Britain. He's also vowed to drive down what he's describing as child poverty after the Institute for Fiscal Studies warned the number of children affected by the two-child benefit cap will rise by a third over the next 5 years. But Sir Keir says the cap will remain for the time being.
Look, it's a tough choice. I'll be clear about that. But one of the things that we are not going to do as we go into this election is to make announcements about changes that we can't afford, because a lot of damage has been done to the economy. So I'm taking the tough choice to say to people before they vote, these are some of the things we won't be able to do because of the state of the economy. What I don't want to do is do what the Tories are doing, which is sort of promise the earth without the funding. And, you know, guess what? After the event, as we've seen in the last 14 years, nothing gets delivered.
Sir Keir Starmer. Now, the Lib Dems say fuel duty relief should be expanded to 20 new areas to support motorists in rural communities. Sir Ed Davey backed up claims by the RAC that fuel retailers are continuing to charge persistently high prices despite falling wholesale costs. The party's leader says rural motorists have been particularly clobbered by the cost of living, and he's calling for the current scheme to be expanded, which sees retailers compensated for passing on lower prices to drivers. Sir Ed Davey saying it'll be funded by tackling tax avoidance.
Cost £7 million. And in our costings we published when we launched our manifesto, we had many ways we were raising the money. One of the big ways is through tackling tax avoidance. We're going to invest £1 billion a year in the tax authorities so they can raise £7 billion. They reckon they can raise more than that, but that's what we put in, and this would come out of that money.
Sir Ed Davey. Now, His Majesty the King and Queen Camilla led the monarchy in celebrating the ancient Order of the Garter today as the royal family's summer season begins. The royal couple follow tradition, keeping to the back of the procession dressed in white plumed hat and dark blue velvet robes. Other members of the order, including the Prince of Wales, Princess Royal and Duke of Edinburgh, were also there. The Duke of York, who's also a member of the order, didn't join the service. That's the news. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. My name's Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company until 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel, I've got the former Environment Secretary, George Eustace, and a new face to the show, former Shadow Minister for Veterans, Steve McCabe. Good evening to you and welcome to Dewbs & Co. Also, welcome to each and every one of you at home. You know, the drill is very much about you guys as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch all the usual ways. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. You can go on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it these days, at GB News there, or of course you can go online to our website, gbnews.com/yoursay. Brenda has done exactly that and said, hello Michelle, please do not talk about the calf. Well, I'm not going to talk about the calf, but I know what you're talking about, and it really has got a lot of people hot under the collar. Awful situation. I don't know what that police officer was thinking, but no, I shall not be going into it in any more detail than that. Look, it's 17 days to go until the general election. I can cross live to Catherine Forster to bring us up to speed with the goings-on the campaign trails today. Good evening to you. What have we missed?
Yes, good evening, Michelle. Well, Rishi Sunak has been back on the campaign trail, having had a brief break at the G7 and Trooping of the Colour at the weekend. He's been on a gas rig and he is saying that he says, I believe we can win. Now, he's in a pretty small minority, I have to say, because most Conservative MPs, in fact, I can't remember the last time I spoke to somebody in the Conservative Party who actually did believe that they could win. They seem, most of them, focused on desperately trying to keep their seats. I think that's why we haven't seen most of the cabinet out on the campaign trail much, and some are urging Rishi Sunak to sort of go for the jugular on Labour, be a little bit less nice, and point out that Sir Keir Starmer supported Jeremy Corbyn, that he fought for a second Brexit referendum, etc. The Lib Dems have been out near the water, as they seem to always be. They have been talking about rural motorists and how they feel they get a rough deal and they want to help them. Labour have been talking about jobs, 650,000 jobs that they believe they can bring through their £7.3 billion National Wealth Fund. This is all about green technology. They see the race to net zero as an opportunity to bring jobs and prosperity, though the Conservatives have got lots of questions for them about potential job losses as a result of Labour saying they're not going to be granting new oil and gas licences in the North Sea. And then, of course, we had the big reveal today, Reform. They're not a manifesto because they say that word is associated with lies. Their contract promising things that will be very appealing to a lot of people, saying they're going to raise the personal threshold at which you start paying tax from 12,500 to 20,000, saying they're going to raise the amount that you can have from inheritance before you pay tax to 2 million, saying they would pull out of the European Convention of Human Rights, but massive spending commitments totaling some £141 billion a year. That is makes Liz Truss look like a model of financial restraint.
Yeah, let me ask you this briefly before you go. The IFS, they've been responding to some of these manifestos. Just summarise how they have responded to these pledges.
Yes, they have. They have said the sums in this manifesto do not add up. I can't read my own writing. Spending reductions would be significantly less than stated, and the tax cuts would cost more than stated by a margin of tens of billions of pounds a year. So they are having none of it, but huge, huge spending commitments. Something very different will be appealing to a lot of people. But of course, they can make these safe in the knowledge that they're not going to form the next government. Nigel Farage has freely admitted, they'll be lucky to get a handful of seats, but what they're hoping is to get a foothold in Parliament and potentially build their presence looking ahead to an election in 2029.
Interesting stuff. Catherine, thank you very much for that. Rishi Sunak, very confident that the Tories can win the election. Do you share that optimism?
Well, look, nothing's inevitable in any election. But, I mean, the truth is we are the underdog in this election, have been since the start. There's no getting away from the fact that we're trailing Labour, by a long way in the polls. So, yeah, we've got an uphill struggle, but there isn't anything inevitable. And I think there's a real problem in this election that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer appear to be taking people for granted. They think they've got it in the bag. They think people are going to vote for them anyway, and they're doing everything they can to avoid saying what they would do on big issues like tax and spend. Well,
we're going to come on to some of the Labour ideas, but do you think they are taking their voters, or the win, should I say, for granted, Steve?
Absolutely not. I think that's the furthest thing from their mind. I mean, Labour are following a very well-prepared election plan that they've been working on for some time. But, I mean, the manifesto was the culmination of lots of announcements that people have really heard before. So I think people know what they're going to get if they get a Labour government.
And I wonder, we're going to be looking, by the way, at some of the Labour promises, because I want to ask as well, do you think that they've been honest and straight when it comes to the tax situation or not? And I want to look at this GB Energy as well. But before I do that, how does it make you feel? Because 2019, it was, the Tories were on a high, wins like you'd never seen in places that you wouldn't have imagined. When you fast forward now, to be in this position, does it hurt?
Well, look, I fought a lot of elections for the Conservative Party, including 2005, which we lost. So I fought elections that we've lost and elections that we've won.
I know, but the position that you used to be in.
Yeah, and the 2019 election was a very special case for a number of reasons, but most importantly, it was the Get Brexit Done election. People saw that there was a real question about whether Parliament itself would function, whether Parliament itself would respect the democratic will of the people, and they knew that whatever the rights and wrongs of Brexit and whatever they thought about that, you needed to get this done in order to respect that democratic decision. And that is why people right across the country, including in areas that had traditionally been considered safe Labour areas, voted Conservative in a really big way, and they did so to get Brexit done.
Yeah, what do you think? Because I know that many of you did vote Conservative in the last election. Some of you, by the way, for the first time, you lent them your vote. How do you feel like it's turning out? Because often people will get in touch and say, Michelle, why is everyone always bashing the Conservatives? And I've got to say, that's absolutely not intentionally done. I'm, really keen always to find people that want to big up each of their parties. So if you know of anyone that I'm missing talking to, get in touch and let me know. Do you share the optimism of Rishi Sunak? But of course, one man that was stealing a lot of the thunder today, of course, was Nigel Farage. He was speaking. He was in Wales, actually. He was speaking not about his manifesto, but about his contract with the people. Listen.
Manifestos, one after another, can keep making the same promises, and no one believes now, frankly, a word that they say, which is why today specifically is not a manifesto launch. Because if I say to you manifesto, your immediate word association is lie. And that is, I think, wholly unsurprising. We're about trying to restore some trust in politics. You might dislike what we say. You might not want to vote for what we say, but at least we do say what we mean.
I mean, it's quite remarkable. Of course, you'll be familiar with the YouGov poll that came out a few days ago that actually placed Nigel Farage's party above the Tories. Do you see them as a threat? Reform?
Oh, obviously, yeah. They're undermining the Conservative vote in many key marginal seats. And, you know, the thing about Nigel Farage...
But do you know how egotistical that sounds? When you say, like, they're undermining the Tory vote, it's almost like you feel somehow that vote, it is either Labour's or the Tories. So who are these kind of...
I wouldn't say that at all, Michelle, because I stood for UKIP in 1999. I've stood for minority parties. And actually, I've got huge respect for them. But under a first-past-the-post system, which is what we have now, and I know people like Nigel Farage would like to change that, but the parties themselves, the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, are coalitions. The Conservative Party is a coalition of different strands of Conservative thought, including some people who might be tempted to vote Nigel Farage this time, but others besides that. The same's true in the Labour Party. You've got the Corbynites, you've got the moderates, the Blairites, you've got a whole range of people, Cooperative Party. The political parties, the main parties, are coalitions, and in any election they have to try to keep that coalition together. And that is why the Conservative Party in this election does need to try to appeal to those reform voters to say, if you vote for reform, you're just going to get more Labour voters.
But do you actually think you can appeal to them? Well, you can appeal to them, but do you think the appeal will be successful?
Well, I think the challenge that the Conservatives, my party, have this time is because there's so much coverage of the headline polls and we're seen to be so far behind. A lot of people might think, well, there's probably going to be a Labour government anyway, so I'm just going to vote for reform. And I think that's quite dangerous because it does mean there's a difference between, you know, opposition, but in a strong opposition where you can challenge the government, and a Labour government that might have a majority north of 100, in which case Labour MPs themselves become disempowered and the regime and the advisers around Keir Starmer can pretty much do what they like. And there's a risk to that. Parliament has that accountability role, but if a leader of one party and one political party has too big a majority, it can get away with what it wants.
And do you see Reform UK as essentially giving you what some people have been calling a supermajority? Are you rubbing your hands with glee?
I'm a bit sceptical that there's going to be any supermajority. I'm dubious about that. I think it is absolutely true that Nigel Farage, he's a brilliant showman. I mean, you've got to give him credit. But he has set out to totally smash the Conservative Party. I don't think there's any argument that that's his objective. And it is conceivable that he will create the same kind of conditions that the STP did way back in the early 80s, and he'll create a mood in the country where there will be a period of Labour dominance. That is perfectly possible. I wouldn't rule that out. But he himself, you know, he's a showman. Whatever he did, if he sold washing powder, he would still be a star. The guy is not really a politician. He's someone who enjoys flirting with politics at the expense of others.
Do you think that, really? Because, you know, he is regarded by many as one of the most effective, whether you like him or not, you know, park that. But many people would say he's probably one of the most effective politicians of this lifetime.
No, I think he's a very effective performer, and that's how I'm acknowledging that. It's a brilliant act, and I totally accept that. But, you know, I mean, look at that mismatch we had today. Every sort of sense of disgruntlement or dissatisfaction is packed together. Oh, we're not expecting to win. We're just wanting to be the opposition. But in 100 days, we'll take you out of the European Court of Human Rights. The man will say anything that he knows will press a button. He does it brilliantly, and I credit him for it. But, you know, this is a guy who was promising us a brave new world after Brexit, and look what we've ended up with.
Yeah, but then, sorry, go on.
Well, I don't agree with that. I've known Nigel Farage in various ways for about 25 years, and I don't dislike him. But my frustration with Nigel Farage... Well, my frustration with Nigel Farage throughout has been, in all the time I've known him, he's had a terrible tendency to allow his vanity and his self-indulgence to undermine the very causes he believes in. So you can go back 25 years when some of us were campaigning to keep the country out of the euro, to keep the pound. Tony Blair desperately wanted to get us in there. Nigel Farage was a liability in that because he kept mixing it up and muddling the issue with the wider EU issue. You can go to 2016 when we had, you know, the referendum campaign. Rather than recognise that you needed a cross-party campaign, vote Leave, to lead it, and crucially you needed strong Labour voices in it, Nigel Farage set out to try to become the designated campaign built around his own personality. And Dominic Cummings spent a lot of time trying to contain and manage the ego of Nigel Farage so that we could win that referendum. And then on the night of the referendum, I remember him coming out conceding defeat, you know, even though we didn't have the results, and then changing his mind two hours later when it was obvious we'd won. So he has a tendency to undermine the very things that he believes in, and he's doing it now because the only impact of his involvement in this election is to mean fewer Conservative MPs, a weaker opposition, a stronger Labour government.
But he would argue that actually the Conservative Party have failed in their mission, have failed in their objectives. They're definitely everything that they're not supposed to be. He would argue that they're higher taxes, immigration has got out of control despite the ridiculous promises over and over again about reducing it to the tens of thousands and so on and so forth. So he would argue, if he was here, I'm sure, he would say that actually he's more connected and in tune with the people of Britain, or certainly a chunk of them, and therefore he feels that no one is delivering and representing those people, and that's why.
That is part of his argument, but also he says that he wants proportional representation. But if we had proportional representation in this country, yes, you wouldn't have coalitions within parties. The Conservative Party and Labour would break up into 2 or 3 factions, and you would then have coalitions between parties. And so even if Nigel Farage, in a future world where there was PR, had a chunk of MPs, he would have to make massive numbers of compromises to enter government, and that would mean him jettisoning the very things that he said he would do today.
What do you make to it? I know that many of you will have been following that contract. What did you think to it? Chris says, finally, some common sense stuff. Not sure how achievable it is, he says, but at least somebody out there has recognised the problems that we face and is bold enough to even want to suggest tackling them. Your thoughts on all of that? I want to look at the Labour side of the fence as well, because do you trust their position when it comes to the tax situation in their manifesto or not? Let's carry on the conversation in 2.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Well, the first thing we've got is obviously D-Day, which was so moving that I think everybody was crying. You see these wonderful old people who gave their lives, and they were crying to remember it all. You see tears in the King's eyes. You saw Camilla, the Queen, crying. And I think, gosh, you know, actually Britain's maybe opening up, and we're not sort of stiff upper lip all the time anymore. I think that William was so dignified.
Oh, he's amazing, isn't he?
And he was the young king. And I thought he was brilliant. He must have been heartbroken that he couldn't have his wife with him. And one of the people who knocks us on the head now and then is Harry. He got the green light to appeal to the appeal. It's a third one, and he wants to make sure that the government gives him protection all the time, automatically. One of the reasons is that he's going away with Meghan for a tour, world tour, which made my heart sort of pump, because this is going to be another copy of what the royal family is like. And he wants to be covered. Well, it's not on our tax, frankly.
So we, the British public, would pay for this?
Yes, yes. It's a joke, isn't it? And he also said he wanted it all done by the end of the month, June, and the judge said he doesn't deserve that. He's not in that VIP category. So he was sort of put in his place, but I don't think he can believe that. And the other thing is the wonderful wedding yesterday. And one of the things I loved, there was a wedding dress, but also I loved the blue velvet shoes. William again was wonderful.
Yeah.
He was absolutely wonderful. He was ushering everyone around, which seems funny for an heir to the throne, and actually would jump in the bus that was taking them to the celebration.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Queer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun. It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel remain. Look, lots of you getting in touch about Nigel Farage. You're saying, what is this? A Nigel Farage bashing competition. You see, and this is the interesting thing because many people now on both sides of the fence are trying to, I would say, almost undermine Nigel because, of course, it's in their interest to try and stop people voting for them. But that, again, is split because many people saying, actually, you're getting in touch with me. Some of you saying it's a fast track for Labour. Other people saying that the Tories absolutely deserve it. Margaret says, without Boris, Nigel is the best that we have. And we had a big conversation about that on Thursday, about whether or not actually the Tories had completely caused themselves problems by ousting Boris in the way that they did. I know that many of you think that that was absolutely the case. Claire says all the other parties are essentially running scared of Farage. Andrew says, can we just say, look at what the Tories have done to this country? He says they don't deserve to survive as a major political party. Does that bother you, those kind of views? Have you heard that before?
Yeah. No, of course it does. And look, as I said, we go into this in a very difficult set of circumstances. You've had the COVID pandemic in particular, where countries around the world had to borrow huge amounts of money to get through that. And we're seeing some of the consequences of that. And around the world, it doesn't matter whether these are parties or governments of the left or the right. A lot of them have taken a big hit for those decisions that had to be taken during COVID.
Well, I mean, don't even get me started on this because, as my regular viewers will know, I have very strong opinions about whether or not we should have followed that path. But anyway, Ian says, Michelle, can you tell everybody that they are basically trying to portray that you either go Tory or you go Labour, otherwise your vote is futile. He says this is essentially Team Uniparty. Please, can you remind your panellists that we're not stupid, please? There you go, Ian. Consider your message passed on. Right, let's talk then, shall we, about the Labour Party, because there's been a lot of kind of toing and froing about whether or not the sum total of their spending plans and taxation plans is actually in that manifesto. Wes Streeting, he has been speaking out about this. Listen.
Firstly, our manifesto is fully costed, fully funded, with promises we can keep and the country can afford. Secondly, where I disagree with the Nuffield, where I disagree with the Nuffield Trust, and is the assumption they're making that this manifesto is the grand sum total of any future budgets and any future spending reviews. That's just wrong. That's not the way election campaigns work.
Steve, what do you think? So the criticism here will be actually they're not telling the truth. They're hiding tax increases. They're probably going to create this emergency budget in the autumn time where they say, look, the picture's not what we thought it was, and now we're going to have to do all of these things, and bang, there go your tax rises. What do you think to that?
Well, I think that's the scare I would expect. It's the scare that's levelled against Labour at every general election I can think of. So it's no great surprise. And if you're in the desperate state that George's squad are in, it's obvious that that's what you're trying to do. I think Labour have been pretty clear in what they've ruled out. They've tried very hard to explain how they're going to fund what they're going to do. It's a modest programme, they've admitted that. And I think just yesterday, wasn't it, after all the latest fuss they've tried about council tax, Jonathan Ashworth ruled that out. So, I mean, like from a party that's given us the highest tax rate since the Second World War, that's used council tax as a way to disguise its own revenue raising, I think it's a cheap shot, and I don't think people buy it. And I think the truth is people know they're going to get a modest programme under a Labour government because the other lot have wrecked the country's finances, and it's going to take a while to put things right.
But I thought even the IFS was saying that your sums didn't add up, the Labour Party sums didn't add up.
Well, I haven't seen that. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I thought that they were coming out and saying stuff like that. What do you make of it, George?
Well, my view on the Labour side is they've kind of brought this on themselves because they've been describing their plans as fully costed, and this is a fully costed plan. And what we've seen where Streeting concede is that actually it's not. What they've actually said is there are certain big tax rates that they don't intend to move, but on all the other types of tax rates, and they will have all sorts of creative wealth taxes and so on, they're keeping the door open to be able to make those tax
Didn't Jeremy Hunt admit yesterday he'd already spent the 70 billion that you've put aside for tax cuts?
Well, we've set out our own plans. Yeah, I know. I think the truth is both parties, you know, on a budget, they will need the opportunity to be able to do an autumn statement or an emergency budget to set out exactly what they're doing. In our case, so we have set out how we will fund those plans in the years ahead. Labour, they've set out how they will fund what's in the manifesto, but there's huge ambiguity and vagueness in the manifesto about what they would do.
So then, if you're just a member of public at home and both sides are saying that essentially the other one's not telling the truth, I mean, where does a normal average person go from there?
Well, I think it is really difficult. I mean, we are in a situation at the moment where it is very hard for people to believe anyone. You know, we had the stuff about Nigel a bit earlier. He had his people saying that the OBR had finance-checked his proposals this morning. That's rubbish. That's just another lie. It is very difficult. We're living in an age where people can't trust politicians and they can't believe them. And that, I think, is extremely damaging for democracy. It would be in everyone's interest to pull back from these spurious stories about tax, which are just damaging everyone.
So where do you think this lack of trust has come from then?
Well, I think it's a mixture of the behaviour of political parties over a period of time, and it's also a feature of social media where anything can be said and is given the same equivalence as already checked facts.
I mean, so I'm just sitting there, and I know my audience will be sitting there, because many of them won't know how to vote, or if even actually to vote at all. There'll be many people saying, actually, do you know what, I'm just not going to bother. You'll perhaps be saying it in colourful language, a little bit more spicy than I've just said. Where do they go?
Well, I personally don't think this is a new challenge. You could look at any election in the last 40 or 50 years and you'd see people saying the same. You can go to the 1997 election, people said similar things. I think the real problem we have in modern politics, and by modern I mean the last half century or so, is the manifestos are actually quite vague. And they are necessarily vague because we actually ask way too much of political parties to be able to put together a fully fledged and fully costed programme, when really they're voluntary organisations run by a handful of 20-something researchers who have to put these manifestos together. Well, the machinery of government, with tens of thousands of policy experts, sit on their hands waiting for the manifestos to be published so they can put it in little neat, red lever arch files for new ministers to say how you're going to do your manifesto. We've got to somehow at some point get better at enabling manifestos to be more detailed and more candid, that set out a programme for government, and then voters will be able to look at a manifesto and decide. But at the moment, what they see is arguments and people trading insults on debate programmes, American-style debate programmes, which really, I think, have undermined political discourse in this country.
Do you?
Yeah. I think they're a retrograde step.
But this started long before the manifestos. I mean, the minute the government started using civil servants to try and pick holes in their opponents' programmes, that started then, and you've got to take some of the blame for that, I'm afraid.
What do you say back to that?
Well, we had the same with Tony Blair. I was in opposition, and you had armies of civil servants. When we were fighting joining the euro, we worked out at one point that there were about 4,000 civil servants employed to basically campaign for the euro indirectly.
The difference was that was an argument about the existing government's policy. I'm talking about what should be a free and fair election, where one side is actually making sure it isn't free and fair by misusing government money and government authority.
Well, I don't think there's anything different what they've done, in terms of costing certain proposals. The party themselves run these sort of costings. Everything gets criticised anyway in terms of an election. But there's nothing that, apart from anything else, the civil service studiously avoid getting involved in elections.
Well, that's not what Richie said in the TV debate the other night. He said, Labour are going to cost you £2,000. I've had it checked by my civil servants.
Yeah, but if that wasn't true, because I was watching that TV debate, and I'm sure many of you were at home as well, Rishi Sunak kept coming out about this £2,000 smacking Keir Starmer. If it wasn't true, surely Keir Starmer, straight away, straight off the bat, as soon as Rishi said, you're going to be, costing the family £2,000 a year, why didn't Starmer say that's not true? Straight from the back.
I think his problem was he couldn't get a word in edgeways if you watch that debate. I've never seen anything so public school bullying in my life.
You think, what was bullying?
I thought Sunak went on to that debate to say one thing. He was going to talk over everybody. He was going to repeat it over it. He'd clearly been schooled to do that. That's why it was such a lousy debate.
Come off it. You're telling me, because I watched this, and I know that many people at home did.
And most people said it was lousy.
But he went over and over and over saying about this £2,000. Keir Starmer had multiple opportunities to say that's not true. He didn't. It was only like, I think there was a break or something, and then he came back on with a completely different perspective. It was almost like someone had got hold of him in the back room or whatever it is that they do and given him a shake, and then he came out and started pushing back against the £2,000. So everyone at home is sitting there going, if it's not true, why didn't you say it wasn't? And you're saying it's because he was bullied. I mean, come on.
Well, I was saying that I did actually witness on the programme he attempted to actually respond, and he was cut off by the moderator, who said, "Oh, we're coming to that later." So I did see that part of it. You know, I can't speculate on what exactly happened.
What's public school got to do with it? Because you said it was public school bullying.
Well, because I thought it was that arrogance of public school bullying. Sunak thought he had a right to command the programme and to talk over everybody, and that's what he demonstrated. Exactly the same as when he was in the debates with Liz Truss. He treated her as if she didn't have the same rights because she was a woman.
Really?
Well, that's what I saw. You're asking me.
Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair at all. But it comes to my point about these TV debates. They're a sort of American thing. I just don't think they really work in our system. I remember having to prepare David Cameron, to go into a leadership one against David Davis and others. And, it's really less about your programme and what you plan to do. It ends up being, how does it look? And, we all remember, Nick Clegg got a huge bounce in the polls because he looked cool at the podium and had his hand in his pocket, and this was seen to be a fresh new thing. And it was nothing of the sort. But for a brief while, the Lib Dems enjoyed their time in the sun, courtesy of really just the way things looked in a temporary way on telly.
What do you guys at home think to these debates? Do you think that they are essentially a value add, a step forward in the election campaigns, or a step backwards? Do they change your opinions in any way, shape or form? And as for politicians looking cool, I can tell you who don't look cool. Towards the end of the programme, I'll be showing you some of the latest clips from some aspiring MPs again. They're absolutely absurd. But I'm sure you might have a different opinion. After the break, I want to talk to you about this GB green energy plan from Labour. Is it going to make our bills cheaper or not? See you in 2.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News and weather update from the Met Office. It will be another bright start to Tuesday. However, it's going to cloud over through the day and there's a risk of some pretty heavy showers once again. Low pressure still quite close to northern areas, so that's bringing that shower risk, particularly across the north and east through today, but that shower risk will move over to the northwest through tomorrow. So a few showers still to come for eastern Scotland through tonight as well. It will remain fairly cloudy and drizzly across northern areas of Scotland, but elsewhere for the rest of the UK, it'll be a clear and dry night with the risk of some mist and fog developing by tomorrow morning, and temperatures around 11 or 12 degrees for most towns and cities. So bright start to the day on Tuesday, potentially a bit of mist and fog around, but it's the far north of Scotland that's going to see the cloudiest of skies, and with that northerly wind it's going to be feeling not a lot like summer at all. 11 or 12 degrees at best, 9 degrees for some of us, and some quite persistent drizzly rain. Now temperatures rise as we head further south with more in the way of sunshine to start the day. As I said, there is a chance of some mist and fog, and notice this massive rain over the near continent. That will start to approach from the south and east through Tuesday lunchtime, and we could see some heavy rain across parts of Kent and Sussex, and then towards Essex, parts of Suffolk as well later on in the day. So here it will turn potentially quite wet. We could also see some very heavy showers across western areas of Scotland as well as northwestern England, but elsewhere a dry and fairly bright day, but a little bit cooler than today, tomorrow. Now, another bright start to come on Wednesday, and Wednesday's looking like a much brighter day by and large as well. However, we do have a weather front approaching from the north and west. That will bring thicker cloud to parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland as well later on in the day. But for most of us, it stays dry and bright as we head through Wednesday, Thursday and likely into Friday as well, with temperatures rising towards 24 degrees.
The latest GB News travel. Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner with the very latest. It's still really slow if you're heading through North Yorkshire. The A174 is shut westbound off the Greystones roundabout just south of Grangetown. That's the scene of a serious accident tonight. And there are queues if you're heading north up the M6 through Warwickshire. Lorries broken down, blocking off the left lane and the exit slip is partly blocked to free the Coventry exit this evening. On the M5 in Gloucestershire, the northbound exit remains shut. Junction 14, the Thornbury and Fowlfield exit for emergency bridge repair works that are ongoing. And in West London, the Lambton Road at Heston, that's still closed after a fire broke out inside a building. In Devon, the A361 is closed westbound through Barnstaple after a trailer overturned just off the Lake roundabout. And GWR trains are suspended in London, West leading to Greenford after a train broke down. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Hi there, this is Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7 o'clock tonight. George Eustace and Steve McCabe keep me company. We've just been asking you about those TV debates and whether or not it's your kind of thing, whether or not they've been a step forward or not. Sue says all of these debates seem to be a massive bore. She says she can't listen to any of them and they would never influence her voting decision. We'll never say never, you know, because, I don't know, there's always an opportunity that someone puts their foot in it and perhaps wishes that they did not. Keep your thoughts coming in, but of course, Labour has vowed to create 650,000 new jobs and to help make Britain better off. Let's listen to Keir Starmer explain.
Great British Energy is going to be an energy company that will drive our work on renewables. So whether that's floating offshore wind turbines, nuclear, hydrogen, there's a race now for pretty well every green job that's going, and we would be good at that. We've got the skills for that. We've got the sort of workforce who would be good at it, but we just need to drive it through now at pace to get the change that I think will bring lower bills, that will bring energy security, but also the next generation of jobs for the future.
I know I'm supposed to be listening intently to what Keir Starmer says, but whenever I see these kind of announcements, when you've got this gathered workforce in a semicircle behind them with their high visors on, I prefer looking at their faces. I wonder what goes through their mind when their boss goes, right, you, politician, in, and you're standing behind them. Anyway, look, Rishi Sunak, he's been responding to some of that. Listen.
Was out with our fantastic Secretary of State, Claire, today at a gas rig in the North Sea, seeing the importance of the North Sea to our energy security, to cutting people's bills. Again, what would Labour do? They would ban North Sea energy, damaging our economy, damaging our energy security, rushing to net zero in a wage that saddles families with thousands of pounds of costs.
Former Environment Minister, so GB Energy, does it get a tick in the box from you? Will it tick the box, the primary box that everyone wants, which is cheaper bills?
No, it won't make any difference. It'll just be another quango. And I think this is one of the worrying things that I see in Labour at the moment. I think that today there was another one about having a new unit on homelessness. The crucial thing is what policies you put in place. And if you look at energy, yes, we've got the right incentive schemes to encourage offshore wind, and it's been a massive success story over the last decade. We've now, 40% of our energy now comes from offshore wind. And there are other projects as well on geothermal energy. We are putting the right investment there to do it. You don't need a quango to tell you what to do. You've already got armies of officials in Whitehall, in the Department for Energy, who are thinking about these things. And all really they're going to do in Labour is take those civil servants, put them in a new office somewhere at great expense, get them some marketing agent and have a new logo done and call it a new quango. And I think it's disappointing because in the first 5 years of this government, basically, it was David Cameron and George Osborne spent a huge amount of time dismantling some of the pointless quangos that Tony Blair had set up. And here we are again with Keir Starmer basically on a quango fest.
Is it a quango fest?
No, I don't think anything could be further from the truth, really. Look, I'm genuinely pretty enthusiastic about GB Energy. I think it could be the jewel in Labour's crown. And I don't think George has got the right idea here at all. There is a model for this from a previous Labour government when they set up the British National Oil Corporation, which was designed, not a quango, it was run by people who had expertise in the industry, but it was British owned and it was designed to create jobs and create a sovereign wealth fund. And if Mrs Thatcher hadn't privatised it at the very point where it had earned 500 million, it would have gone on to lower bills and make us rival Norway in terms of a sovereign wealth fund. What we're describing now is something with the same potential, but for green energy. And it's ridiculous that you can have wind turbines and not a single component is built in this country, not a single job benefits from it. That's exactly what any government should do, but it's going to take this government to do it.
So you would force manufacturing to be UK-based?
Well, I wouldn't force anything, but the aim should be to make damn sure that the manufacturing benefits are accrued in this country, of course.
With the associated cost hike, because it's much more expensive, isn't it, to say manufacture products in the UK versus, say, I don't know, China. There's a different
well, I'm not
cost
sure
base.
we'd be wanting to buy any energy components from China at the moment. They've tried that. That causes a few problems. We're certainly not going to try that. But I don't quite follow that argument, because the big problem at the moment is actually sourcing many components from abroad. It actually adds to the cost. It doesn't reduce them.
Is that fair?
But I think, look, there's two things. If you want a manufacturing strategy, well, I'd be in favour of that. I'd be supportive of saying we should be domestically manufacturing more things, and I would be much more wary about allowing, foreign capital to buy, British champion manufacturers. I would support that, but that's not what this is about. This is, GB Energy. It's all about trying to join things up, and it will become, another quango that tries to chivvy private enterprise to do what it's already doing. And actually, what you really want is the right incentives so that private enterprise will enter the market and deliver. And it has done that on offshore wind. We need it to do the same on things like geothermal energy too.
Do you think we're consulting people enough as to whether or not they are on board the net zero bus? Because it does feel to a lot of people like it's just kind of forced upon people. Do you think there should have been a referendum on this a little while back before people had all these targets committed to?
Well, I mean, you could have a referendum on anything, but we know what happens when you have referendums and people have a free-for-all, so I wouldn't be a fan of that.
What happens when you have a referendum?
I think, actually, there is...
hang on, what do you mean? When you said, what happens when people have a referendum, what do you mean?
I was referring to the Brexit referendum and the nonsense that was talked and the results that accrued.
So, well, that's not... Yeah, but people would say, well, hold on a second, they voted the way that they
voted according to what they were
vote.
promised. It's just that what they were promised didn't turn out to be true.
Well, they voted for sovereignty, didn't they? They voted...
Yes. Well, give me an example of the sovereignty we've gained.
Well, it was true, because we are now a self-governing independent country again. We can make our own laws.
We can't control our own borders.
We can decide the policies to do that. We can decide our own trade policies. I have my own differences with the government sometimes on trade policies, but at least we could decide it. We can decide our own immigration policy. We can decide our own agriculture
Well, you're not exactly doing a very good job of that, George.
Well, I think we are. No,
and
it won't be perfect in the first iteration, but the crucial thing is we are a self-governing country again. We weren't while we were in the EU. We had to implement laws decided elsewhere.
Actually, what I was going to say was, in terms of the net zero thing, I think there is a sense in people's heads that it's far too hair-shirt. It's all about what you've got to give up. And I think that is what irritates people about it.
Well, there you go. What do you make to all of that? And are you on board this net zero bus or not? We'll carry on this conversation after the break, but I also want to look at some of the goings-on social media when it comes to people, i.e. Suella Braverman this time desperately trying to get elected. See you in 2.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Helen Worth, who of course plays Gail Platt in Coronation Street, is going to leave the soap after an epic 50 years. I'm joined now by another Corrie legend, Charlie Lawson, whose character, of course, Jim McDonald, lived across the cobbles from Gail Platt for many years. Welcome to the show, Charlie. I can see you looking at those images there, and has to be said, fantastic acting. In 50 years, many of us just grew up with these characters and basically think they're part of our family. Can you shed light on some of your happy memories of the talent of Helen Worth?
We saw each other every day. She was a consummate professional and still is. This initially surprised me, but then I thought about it, and I'm frankly not surprised. Having spoken to certain senior members of the cast over the last period of time, you know, when Helen joined, or even when I joined, there was a cast of 25. I would put another 75 on that now, perhaps. It's a different animal now, totally, you know, 4, 5, 6 episodes a week. When Helen started, it would have been 2. She lives in London. She's not getting any younger, and she's done 50 years, for God's sake. Nobody can ask any more of that. And listen, Helen, look at that wee smile. God bless you, darling. I hope you have a great retirement. The trouble with actors is that we very, very rarely hang our boots up unless the bank balance is full, which it very seldom is. But also, we live for attention. And when you're in the most famous program on the planet, that attention 9 times out of 10 is an extremely good experience.
The People's Channel.
It's midday. Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained. I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but it's actually about you.
And we won't ever forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
Now, more than ever, it's important to hear
all sides as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. George Eustace and Steve McCabe remain alongside me. Last week we spoke about Dawn Butler. Do you remember that rap video? This week it's the turn of Suella Braverman. Look.
I have a question for everybody. Who wants to go to the Four Seasons Orlando?
Just awful. I just think that's so embarrassing. It's just, I mean, maybe you're watching that thinking, do you know what, I wasn't going to vote before, but now that I've seen that TikTok video, she is the one for me. I do have to just say, in that constituency where she's standing, which is Fareham and Waterlooville, you've got Suella Braverman, who is the Conservative candidate. You've got Kevin Chippendale-Higgin from Reform UK. You've got Edward Dean, Rejoin EU, Gemma Fernville from Labour, Bella Hewitt, the Liberal Democrats, Robert Holliday from Hampshire Independence, and Baz Marie from the Green Party. Do you like these kind of videos?
Well, I can understand that there'll be some candidates who feel they need to get a presence on something like TikTok.
Why?
Well, because it's where the younger demographic tends to be. And so these days, Facebook tends to be one for, you know, an older demographic. So I understand why they do it, but I don't think they should. And, you know, when I was press secretary to David Cameron, I strongly advised him not to go on Twitter. In those days, that was an early embryonic one. Some would choose to go on, some didn't. He didn't go on it for a while, and then he did eventually go on it. And I just think these formats don't really work for politicians. I think on Twitter, it's now become a sort of cesspit of hatred and ignorance, and it's just so poisonous. I think it's really, and I know they don't even call it Twitter anymore, but it's just not a good one. And TikTok, I just think it doesn't enable you to project a serious image, which is what politicians ultimately need to do.
Steve?
Well, I think all the other candidates you listed should have to do one as well, and we should get Simon Cowell to adjudicate on it.
Judge them. Would you ever do anything like that?
Well, I unfortunately was persuaded once to take part in a terrible singing competition, and if you ever heard me sing, you would realise what a terrible mistake it was. So much as I like to mock this, I have to confess I've fallen foul as well.
I just think it's so low rent, and it makes me feel sorry for us as a country, actually, that this is the kind of level that apparently serious politicians, and this is nothing against the individuals involved, by the way, but I think when you've got serious politicians and this is the way that they actually think that they can canvass and get support, I just find it quite a sad indictment on our political system and the people within it, quite frankly. frankly. Philip says, Michelle, I don't think anyone ever went into politics for the good of the public. Oh, you're a harsh man. Il says, Michelle, we've got clowns for politicians now, and it shames Britain. Goodness me, you're a harsh person. Anyone that you like that's an MP or was an MP or not? Alessa says, I'm a young person and I see the vision, but I was not convinced by those kind of videos. They are cringe, she says. There you go. Look, that's all I've got time for tonight. Thank you very much for your company, Steve and George. Don't go anywhere though, because up next is Camilla, but that's all from me. Night-night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News and weather update from the Met Office. It will be another bright start to Tuesday. However, it's going to cloud over through the day and there's a risk of some pretty heavy showers once again. Low pressure still quite close to northern areas, so that's bringing that shower risk, particularly across the north and east through today, but that shower risk will move over to the northwest through tomorrow. So a few showers still to come for eastern Scotland through tonight as well. It will remain fairly cloudy and drizzly across northern areas of Scotland, but elsewhere for the rest of the UK, it'll be a clear and dry night with the risk of some mist and fog developing by tomorrow morning, and temperatures around 11 or 12 degrees for most towns and cities. So bright start to the day on Tuesday, potentially a bit of mist and fog around, but it's the far north of Scotland that's going to see the cloudiest of skies, and with that northerly wind it's going to be feeling not a lot like summer at all. 11 or 12 degrees at best, 9 degrees for some of us, and some quite persistent drizzly rain. Now temperatures rise as we head further south with more in the way of sunshine to start the day. As I said, there is a chance of some mist and fog, and notice this massive rain over the near continent. That will start to approach from the south and east through Tuesday lunchtime, and we could see some heavy rain across parts of Kent and Sussex, and then towards Essex, parts of Suffolk as well later on in the day. So here it will turn potentially quite wet. We could also see some very heavy showers across western areas of Scotland as well as northwestern England, but elsewhere a dry and fairly bright day, but a little bit cooler than today, tomorrow. Now, another bright start to come on Wednesday, and Wednesday's looking like a much brighter day by and large as well. However, we do have a weather front approaching from the north and west. That will bring thicker cloud to parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland as well later on in the day. But for most of us, it stays dry and bright as we head through Wednesday, Thursday and likely into